Good evening. If anyone is listening to this, and I'm sure I've got a very small but dedicated number of followers, joking somewhat, this is the first of the Snapolitic live streams. So if anyone has been interested in anything I've rabbited on about on Twitter, I've been blogging under Snapolitic for about 10 or 11 months now. And it's just a general introduction on random ramblings about mainly British politics and some foreign affairs and so what with myself and a few other friends. I thought I'd be even more of a politics geek and actually try live streaming and talking to people who are quite interesting that I find politically. It's somewhat frustrating talking on Twitter because you've got 140 characters and it's full of nutters who are very black and white. So what I want to talk about today is the Jeremy Corbyn campaign. As I'm sure a lot of people who are into a bit geeky about British politics have been following, the Corbyn campaign has kind of came really from the back and is now the massive news story in the UK. And it looks like he's going to win it, which if you betted early at the bookies, you've now won thousands of pounds. Or if you're like me and you didn't get there on time, you've missed chance. Person I was going to speak to today is a guy called Robbie Bennett. Robbie was in kind of an overlapping group of friends at school. So I know Robbie from school, and he's always been really interested in politics. I think Robbie's one of the good guys. And I think he's very sincere and honest about what he thinks. And a lot of people, are either apolitical or don't take the time to actually get involved in things. So I will let Robbie introduce himself and say a few bits. Hi, Robbie.
Hey Sam, how you doing? You all right?
Pretty good, thanks.
Good. Well, I won't say too much about myself because I think the whole Corbyn thing's obviously really interesting. There's so much to cover. But thanks for the very kind words. It's pretty. Anybody that knows me slightly would definitely say I'm pretty left wing. Probably even on the hard left, if you want to use those kind of terms. And I've actually voted Green in the election in 2015 because they were the party that I thought offered the sort of policies and changes that we need as a society. And I knew Labour were having a leadership election, but I wasn't particularly interested at first when I could see that it was, Andy Burnham, Vivek Cooper, just sort of these non-entities really. And I don't think many people were that excited. But once Corbyn joined and kind of threw his hat in, I got to learn a bit more about his past and what he kind of believes in. He's very similar politically to the Green Party, and because obviously he's in Labour, he has much more chance of actually doing something. Even the most hardened Green supporter wouldn't be able to look you in the eye and say, "Yeah, we're going to win an election." That's very unlikely to happen even within our lifetimes. Personally, in my opinion, just because of the political system and how entrenched people's thinking are about parties, and also because I think at the moment not enough people agree with the kind of thinking that the Greens have got. I think it's a bit too different in some areas than what people, especially older generations maybe, that have lived longer and lived in this kind of society and this way of doing things for longer. It's a bit obviously scary or a bit more out there. But yeah, I think Corbyn's got a lot of good things to say. I don't think he's a perfect candidate. There isn't such thing as that. But I think that he's got some interesting things. I've been doing some volunteering for his campaign quite a lot actually. And I'd be happy to sort of talk about that if you'd like me to throughout the podcast.
Yeah, no, that's a really good introduction. Thank you. I mean, just to clarify at the start, so I guess you're in this glut of new members that the media is saying have kind of just rushed to join Labour. Have you joined as a member, or are you one of these £3 people?
I originally registered for £3 just because it was cheaper, basically. But I will be, regardless of the result, I will be joining as a member within the next month, basically. I just sort of figured that I didn't really want to do it twice and pay two sets of money, and I wanted to vote first and then sign up after because of what there might be. Also, with all the issues I'm having with the vote, with people doubling up kind of thing and getting rid of people for mistakes or doubling up, or people that I think are trying to vote maliciously, I thought it's better to wait till it's over before I become a member now, because they might think I'm trying to vote twice kind of thing. So yeah. Just a £3 person at the moment.
No problem. So you did say you were part of the Corbyn campaign. I think
yeah.
People who actually get involved in politics are kind of like train spotters now, in that it's a bit of a niche thing to do. So do you want to give a brief overview of how that's gone and if you've enjoyed it or not? Because a lot of people don't do that now.
Yeah, it's quite. I definitely enjoyed it. It's quite an interesting thing being in. Some of the people that are just so political that are doing it, the people that have been in Labour for a while, they sort of talk about people I've never heard of before. But it's been interesting. The main thing I've done is phone banking, so just literally ringing people, asking who they're going to vote for, and then having a conversation with them if they're interested. And then I've done some data input as well, which is obviously not anywhere near as interesting. What's amazed me is even though every person's different, obviously, everybody's got their own outlook, is the kind of, you can easily categorize the responses that you get from people into three categories. They've all been variations of the same response. The main ones that you get is you get people that are really excited to go, oh yeah, Jeremy's great, he's different, things have been the same for too long, politicians don't represent us anymore, they don't care about us, he's different, he has principles, he stands by them, that kind of thing. Like, they get really excited and they're kind of, full on Corbynites, if you want to call them that. The second lot of people that kind of come from the point of view of, yeah, he's a great guy, I like him a lot, and I think that he's got good principles, but I can't vote for him. And then they usually give a reason that, to be honest with you, it's just something. It's a reason that you could Google Corbyn and find an article somewhere. So something like, oh, I think he's unelectable, or they'll bring up Michael Foot, or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I've rarely had anybody come up with an objection that I thought was their own, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I think that the kind of discussion around the whole thing's had an impact on quite a lot of people, which is a bit of a shame, really. And then the third lot of people that are very hostile towards him. They're not a big amount, but they're a decent amount of people. I'm not saying they're hostile in the sense that they hate him or that even that they think his ideas are bad, but more that their opposition to him's a bit stronger. They sort of say he'll put us in the wilderness, or he's going to destroy Labour and make them unelectable. We'll just be a protest party, but it's a bit more disdain in the way they're saying it. But the other interesting thing that I've noticed is when people have said, I'm going to vote for Yvette Cooper or Andy Burnham or Kendall or whatever, they haven't really been able to give you a positive reason of why. It's not really been, nobody's kind of gone because of, oh, they really inspire me, or I think these policies are great. Usually it's because they think that's the best option, but I kind of feel like the other three candidates don't really inspire people. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but that's been my experience, is that it's been kind of pragmatic reasons for going for those other three candidates as opposed to, more positive reasons, if that makes any sense.
That does make sense. I mean, I would somewhat caveat that with a pragmatic reason can also be a positive reason. So, it's not per se a negative that you're trying to be pragmatic.
No, I'd probably agree with that. I didn't really mean it in the sense that, but it was a poor choice of words. Obviously, everything's a mixture of being pragmatic and principled. I think what I more meant is they're not voting for them because that's a candidate that they think's great, or do you know what I mean? It's more of a resignation they'll do sort of thing. Like, oh well, I think they might be maybe the best chance of winning. Hopefully, I don't know, we'll see. But there's not really. I feel like with Corbyn, he's definitely the most dividing candidate. He brings out the most positive response from people by a long way. Obviously, the most negative as well. I think he's definitely energized the whole debate. I don't think people would be anywhere near.
I think that's one way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that even people that don't agree with him politically or things he's done in the past or whatever, at least sort of think that he's added to the debate, widened the debate. I guess it would. The other three candidates, in my opinion, anyway. And I think from our conversation before, you somewhat agree, don't really have much, they're not particularly strong candidates, or they're not really offering anything that I think would appeal that much to people. I think it would, if you're not many people is involved in politics as much as me, you're always interested. And if you listen to any of them talk and what they have to say, it wouldn't really sound much different than what Ed Miliband was saying a few months ago.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Liz Kendall, just as an example, I don't want to get to Liz Kendall right now, but it does sound somewhat different to Ed Miliband. I mean, there's a big distinction in approach there.
Yeah, probably. I mean, you can come up with some sort of differences. Obviously, Burnham with the bringing health and social care together. Yvette Cooper and the what is it? She wants to bring free child care for everybody, something like that. And Liz Kendall. But I mean, to be honest with you, I don't really know much about the policies, and that's part of the problem. Is I think that I'm not necessarily talking about their approach. I'm more about the general presentation of everything.
Yeah.
So what they wear, the way they speak.
This is actually, Robbie, kind of a good segue into the main conversation, because I thought at one point, let's actually talk about the other candidates. So do you want to briefly just go over each of the three candidates and say, I don't know, what you like and what you don't like?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Yvette Cooper, I think that she's quite experienced, which is good. I think it is good to have experience in the cabinet, and I think that it's good that she offered. Even though I don't like I'm never going to ever say that you should vote for somebody because they're a woman. just to put that out there. Like, I think she probably that's the best, but the fact that she's a woman and that somebody's standing and that kind of thing, I think that's probably a positive thing. But I certainly don't think that's just a reason they should vote for or anything like that. To be honest with you, it's really hard for me because I don't know. I've tried and I've not found much in the way of policies. I mean, I think free childcare for everybody is good. She talks about high-tech jobs for people. I thought that was good, but I don't know what kind of high-tech job she means. Negatives, I mean, I don't really want to get too critical of any candidate. They're all doing the best, but
do so if you want to.
I just don't really feel like she offers any. I mean, she offers anything that different.
Yeah.
And I think she's using the fact that she's a woman to try and boost the candidacy a bit too much. And I find it quite, off-putting. I think she should stop talking about the fact she's a woman all the time and just say I'm the best candidate.
Well,
and leave her. I don't think Liz Kendall's done that anywhere near as much.
That is something I was going to mention because I mean, did you know that Liz Kendall? Did you know that Yvette Cooper's a woman and a mother?
I did know that. She's mentioned it before, I think.
She seems to have somewhat mentioned that now and then. Which I mean, I don't know. I mean, not to get onto side of an issue, but I find this all deeply unprogressive. The idea that a person's physical characteristics are the defining thing of the candidate. I think if you consider that people have empathy, they can represent people they don't literally look like or have the same anatomy as. And I find this a bit worrying that this is becoming a thing in British politics.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I imagine that she's been told behind the scenes to say that, bring up the fact you're a woman, bring up the fact you're a mother. People like that. And being honest with you, from my phone banking, a large amount of people have said I will vote for one of the ladies because we need a woman. So it has worked. There has been a decent amount of people that have voted for Yvette Cooper because she's a woman. So as a pure electoral strategy, it's not that bad. But I do. It's a complex one because obviously women. We're not women, so we don't want to speak too much about kind of like how well a woman can feel represented by a man. But I definitely don't think that you should elect somebody because of their gender. I personally think that Corbyn's policies on women, he's got a woman document and things he's mentioned.
I have seen that, yeah.
Yeah, a tackle. Having spoken to a few women about it that have read it, and that tackles and mentions some of the issues that they actually go through, and kind of aren't really mentioned by anybody. Things like harassment and that sort of thing. And Yvette Cooper's not mentioned any of that. So I think that's an example there of how, as you just said, the gender doesn't really necessarily mean that you're any better.
Just to bring it back onto ideas. So do you know I'm trying to think of a black Conservative MP. I think you have Kwasi Kwarteng. Have you seen him on the news?
I haven't actually. I can give him I didn't know there was.
There are. No, they've got very good ethnic minority representation. Actually, the Tories, they've improved a lot in the past few parliaments.
How do you spell the name?
Kwarteng, kind of Kwarteng, or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, what I was going to say is, I mean, who would represent a young black socialist better, Tony Benn or Kwasi Kwarteng?
That's an extreme example, but I get what you mean. Yeah, we agree on this one, really. Though.
So it's about ideas, then, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's difficult because obviously if a certain section of society, say women or whatever, are underrepresented, I think it is important to try and do something about that. How you do that, I don't know. There's different ways you can come up with quotas, which I've not always been convinced by. But I certainly do agree with you that you shouldn't elect somebody or not elect somebody because of the gender. So you asked about the kind of thing. Yeah. So Andy Burnham, what's good about him? I think he's obviously has the most support of MPs, probably quite comfortably. So he'd probably be the most unifying candidate, I guess. So maybe there'd be less infighting in Labour and they could be more concentrated and united. I think that he's, again, electorally, him being a northerner and that kind of thing, he could probably play up to that a bit as he has done so far.
You're not kidding.
Yeah, I'm not saying that these aren't necessarily positives that I think myself. It's just general ones. I think that he's obviously got some experience. That's probably a good thing. But again, it's sort of his policy is on putting health and social care together. So bringing the social care into the NHS. I've done some work in the NHS. I'm a trained podiatrist, and I think that's probably a good idea. So I've given that one. That's something that needs to be done, and I support him on that policy.
He is.
Next,
Sorry, like I do agree with you, though, Robbie. He is just basically saying I'm Ed Miliband with a northern accent. I mean, I don't get what you get more than that. And this kind of weird obsession with I'm from Liverpool. I mean, well, we know you are, and
yeah, I agree. It works. Unfortunately, though, it does. I don't think it works for people like me and you, but it does work with some people. People think if somebody looks or talks similarly to them, then that person they trust them more, or they think that they're more like them, whether they are or not.
true.
But I do agree. I think it's almost a dumbing down thing, isn't it? It's sort of a hey, you should vote for me because I got to Farage, and as we know from Farage, it works. People thought he was a man of the people. So yeah. On negatives, actually, Burnham's probably got more than the other candidates. Weirdly enough, I mean, he's just shown himself, in my opinion, to not really have any. I think he's an ultimate opportunist. He'll vote for things when he's told to. He'll change his mind on things when he's told to. He suddenly supported nationalising railways and getting rid of tuition fees when he could see how popular Corbyn was getting. He'll seem to say and do anything that puts him in the best position at that particular moment. And I don't think that means he's not particularly trustworthy to a lot of people, and certainly not to me. And today he said something on the hustings this morning on the radio that I was telling you about. He said that I'm a Labour man, and that's why I never defied the whip, because I support Labour and it's not the party. But interestingly enough, he was asked if Corbyn wanted to leave NATO, would you resign the shadow cabinet? Because he said he didn't want to do that over the welfare bill, and he said yes. But I don't think he would. I think he was just saying that because that was the beneficial thing for him to say at that particular moment, if you get me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think Burnham's chased Corbyn all over the place, and it just looks terrible. But I mean, this segues nicely into Liz Kendall, who, I think fair play to Liz Kendall in the sense that, she obviously thinks Corbyn's a massive raging idiot, and she was honest enough to say, I think he's that wrong, I won't serve in his cabinet. Which, I'm assuming Burnham thinks Corbyn's wrong from his political position. So I don't get why he can't just be honest that he wouldn't really want to serve with him.
Well, this election has been Burnham's to lose, really.
Agreed.
And he's lost it comfortably. It's looking like he might come in third place potentially now, and there's no... all the cards have been stacked in his favour, and it's kind of what makes his loss or him not winning so telling, and Corbyn doing so well because what he's been up against so telling. I think that I have to say I think Burnham's probably the weakest candidate of them all, in my opinion. I mean, Liz Kendall is the one I disagree with the most, is what she says, and
have a good stab at Liz Kendall. Sorry, that sounds terrible, but go and have a
aggressive undertone
of Liz.
Well, Liz Kendall, I'll go what's good about her first. I agree with you that she's obviously honest, or at least says things that probably would be unpopular. Are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. The sound seems like cut out. I thought that was really weird. Sorry. Yeah, she. I'll give it to her that she obviously has her own. She's set a position for herself and she's stuck to it. And I think that's to be admired. That you shouldn't just change your mind based on how people reacting to her, because she's obviously been in last place for a long time and she could have obviously done a Burnham. So I'll give her respect for being principled. That's partly why I like Corbyn, and I think that she obviously shows a lot of ambition. She obviously has a lot of drive to succeed. But in terms of her political positions, that's where my disagreements come a lot. I mean, she keeps saying I'm not going to call her a Tory in disguise or anything like that.
You want to though, don't you? Go on.
No, I don't want to, because it's nasty. It's also not true. It's not true. I mean, she talks about devolution, which you mentioned earlier, which is obviously not, which I think is good. And I don't think she's as close to Tories as people say she is. But a lot of things she says, especially around the economy, it's just sort of meaningless. Like, she talks about a budget surplus a lot. Anybody that knows anything about an economy knows that the budget surplus isn't something you want, because it means that a government is sitting on money and not doing anything with it. They're either taxing people too much, or they're not investing, and trying to stimulate the economy or build schools or whatever you want to use your money for. So I think that her views on the economy are a bit kind of sticking with the sticking with the orthodox at the moment that's been set by the Conservatives, and I think that would serve her quite badly. I think she would alienate a lot of the left of Labour if she was to be leader, and that's the reason why she's in last place comfortably, because I think that her opinions are to a lot of people too close, let's say, to the Tories. Not that she's a Tory in disguise, but too close. And I think she's also at times been quite nasty. Like the way that she's talked about Corbyn when he's been sat right next to her, I thought was a bit unnecessary. You know, this, like you said, that whole "I want to serve in his cabinet," and
But that is politics, isn't it?
but yeah, well, no, it doesn't have to be though. I don't think that's an excuse for the kind of like. It's not necessarily. It's just the disdain she's treating him with, like almost like he's an irritation or.
We berate these people when they're not honest. I mean, if she'd have given a response to that saying, I don't know, and so forth, I mean, people would have been like, you're doing a Burnham. But when she's honest and says, I don't want Jeremy in my cabinet, I mean, what is wrong with that? That she doesn't want him in her cabinet.
No, there's nothing wrong with being honest. It's all about the kind of way you're being honest. I remember when Burnham said, this was on the hustings on LBC, I think it was. So I watched quite a few, I can't keep up with them all, but I think it was on LBC. And Burnham said, I'd serve in a Corbyn shadow cabinet, and she turned to him and she was like, really? Like, I can't describe it, but I think...
To be fair, that was my exact response when I watched him do that.
Oh, fair enough, yeah, but I think it's more sort of the nothing wrong with being honest. If you have an opinion, stick to them, and that's fine. I'm not going to criticise her for that. But I think the way that she's spoken about Corbyn at times has been a bit unnecessary, and I don't think I don't think it's. I think if she'd been a bit more kind of honest in a more of a nicer way, she would have come out looking better as well. So I don't think it's worked out well for her either, in a sort of in her interest kind of way. But that's just my views on the candidates. Everybody will have their own opinions. What about you then? What do you think of each candidate?
I think you've kind of broadly nailed it from a different approach.
Anything to add?
I mean, my preferred candidate is Liz Kendall. I mean, and I say that not thinking any of the candidates are particularly majorly impressive. I think kind of the space Corbyn's had to flourish is mainly due to the fact that kind of cadre of Labour MPs from say 2001 onwards are just so kind of politically inept and so inept at actually building a campaign and actually speaking to people in a principled manner. And they've kind of abdicated the idea of principles to the far left. They've not stood up for what we would consider to be centre or centre-left principles and kind of adequately defended them and got people passionate about them. So I think they've got themselves to blame, certainly. Like I said, I mean, I think Yvette Cooper's pretty rubbish. She's never taken a proper position on anything in her life. She's, just going off the fact that she is a woman. I think she's definitely doing that. Again, not impressed with Burnham. I think he's a bit of a Miliband. And I think if he did win, things like mid-staffs would be used against him strongly. And to move on, I mean to mention Jeremy, because we're going to talk about him for the rest of the time. I mean, I do think, firstly, I think there's a bit of a problem where MPs nominate Jeremy knowing they don't really want him to be leader. I think there's something a bit silly about not wanting someone to be leader and nominating them. And I sort of share their hesitancy. I feel that Jeremy is basically going to lead Labour to a very grim 5 to 10 years. And obviously you disagree. And I think we should probably tackle some of those things if you want to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Good. I would be happy to tackle. If you want to ask me a question or make a point or anything, I'll be happy to.
Well, I think this might work better if I kind of broadly ask you, what kind of themes you want to talk about, and then if you expand and just give the Jeremy kind of position as you see it, so to speak, and then what I'll do is, if I kind of just chip in when I have a little point, or if I have a thing to share, then I'll probably do that if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's fine. So you want me to? I mean, the Jeremy position, obviously, I think is pretty well established. I think that I can explain to you if you want why I think he's actually the most electable candidate. If that's
well, shall we do policies first, then we'll go into can he win in 2020. So we'll lay out what he actually believes before we say if he can win or not.
Yeah, I'll do a quick sort. So obviously he believes in trying to tackle inequality, wealth inequality. So that is, I think if these things like higher taxes for the rich, increasing corporation tax slightly, that kind of thing. And he wants a more, I guess you would call it a more balanced economy. And I think he definitely wants to go back to an almost. I've read some interesting statistics about how much our economy is based on the service industry, so in shops and restaurants and that kind of thing, and bars. And I think he wants to push towards a more manufacturing-based industry, whether that's renewable or I don't know what he wants to manufacture exactly, but that's a big thing I think of his. Obviously, another one is nationalisation of railways and the energy industries, although the energy one's been somewhat misunderstood because he doesn't want to buy out the big six. He actually wants the own sort of to be government supplier and for people to build co-ops and local energy production, as opposed to sort of buying the controlling stake in British Gas, which would be very hard, very difficult and very expensive, obviously. What else is it? I mean, it's just so much.
So, Robbie, just to clarify there, so you're saying that he doesn't want full-scale nationalisation of utilities. He wants to have a local co-op.
Yeah, I read his energy policy in detail, and he doesn't want to be. I think basically what happens is sometimes this is where he might be a bit naive about the media. Is he talks about something as I'd be interested in that idea, or we should discuss it, and that gets taken to mean that's something that he will do.
Just on that though, sorry to chip in. If say a company owns something, and he wants it to be a co-op, how does that work? How do you take something off someone?
Well,
I mean, it has to be a co-op.
No, I mean it's not. I don't think he's necessarily taking anything off the company. Obviously, I mean I think the idea that you can have any kind of competition, live competition in things like energy and water is a bit of a joke. Really, it's the same water pipe, it's the same electrical line. And what he's just talking about is I mean I don't know enough about it in detail because he hasn't said about it enough. But my only main point is that some people have said we can't afford to nationalise the energy companies. It's just that he hasn't said that he would do that. He said that he wants to also be a state provider.
I guess what I mean is if you want to make something a co-op, so if you want to kind of radically change the business structure, I mean, isn't it somewhat illiberal to basically take someone's business off them? You're basically saying I want your property and I'm going to give it to other people. Which I mean, is the state as a kind of player in the game, so to speak? Is it fair that it's doing that?
Well, I think that that's an argument that could easily kind of descend into anything. I mean, there's all sorts of areas where the private companies have taken away state things, or where states intervene with laws and that kind of thing. I'm obviously not a big fan of that, and that's affected company profits. And at the end of the day, I think with things like utilities and transport, if you want to call it things that are necessary, what's more important is is it affordable and does it work for large amounts of people? I mean, fuel poverty is a big problem in England. You get thousands of pensioners dying every winter because they can't afford to heat their homes properly. And I would say that is more important than if some company's profits gets infringed on. But that's just my personal view.
But then don't you get problems where when you bring price controls into such a sector, you kind of distort the market, and you have the example of when Ed Miliband had his energy freeze cap.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it came to the point where because the kind of market dropped in international oil, you ended up with it was actually lower. I think the price for oil and the energy prices overall ended up lower than the energy cap that Miliband wanted to set. So in effect, the energy price was going to be artificially high just because Ed Miliband wanted it to be. If you see what I mean.
That's obviously I didn't think that was a particularly good policy. I thought it was quite short term.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, from the whole local. I mean, I've seen examples of local energy before. I think what that more means is things. There's a place in York called St Nicholas Fields where I used to live in York, and it's a environmental centre that's completely run by renewable energy. It's got a bit of solar power, small wind. A wind turbine, really small, genuinely really small one, and it runs completely on renewable energy. I think that's the kind of thing he wants to look at is because it's sort of ridiculous, really, that you're talking about a distorted market. I mean, I already think that the energy and water and all those kind of supplies, the market is distorted because, like I said, they're not providing you with anything that's like unique. It's just a different company giving you the same electricity, basically. Obviously, it might come from a slightly different source, but I think it's a bit of a distorted market. And like I said, the prices are far too high for a lot of people, and I'd rather not. I hate the word the state, but sort of the government or whatever you want to call it has some sort of co-op or government-run one that's not for profit, and then people have the option of that it's a lot cheaper, and because obviously they're running it not to make
When
money.
you say has the option of that, I mean, if we're we can talk about different models of how something's owned. If it's either fully nationalised and owned by the state in a kind of command and control manner, or if
Yeah.
it's a cooperative. But if you have a state provider, when you say choice, are you saying that under a Corbyn system, I would be able to choose water providers between the state or a number of other private institutions?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, he's not made any. He's not made any in his official policy document. That's the only thing I can go on. He's not made any mention of buying out all the water companies or buying out all the electricity or gas companies. He's just mentioned the idea of having a state provider and having co-op owned energy, and so basically from a actual socialist owned way, it's owned by the workers, or by the people that then run it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All locally produced energy, which is something I'm actually a big fan of, the local one where people, because it makes people I think that people are too reliant on things like water and electricity from a distant source. And I think it would actually, talk about illiberal, if you could produce your own energy and be less reliant on things like the state. I think that would be a good thing. It would give you a bit more freedom in your life, and it would make you not. I think that's one of the wider issues now. Is a lot of things are provided by either companies or the state, and that's what forces people to sort of work so much and that kind of thing, because they can't provide that for themselves. And I would definitely like to see a lot more locally produced energy, even if it's just some of it. It's at least better.
Robbie, sorry, mate. Just out of interest, do you know what is his policy on nuclear power?
You know what? I actually don't 100% know.
Me neither.
I think that it would be a part of. He certainly hasn't done a Green Party and ruled it out. I think it would be a part. Actually, if you give me 1 second.
I hope so, because I thought the Greens were very, very silly doing that.
I'm guessing it's all protecting our.
I mean, so when you were in the Greens, did you agree with their nuclear policy?
You never. I don't. I think it's one of those things where, as long as we're getting away from coal and oil, then I'm fine. It wasn't a perfect policy, but we're not arguing against perfection. The way we're producing energy at the moment and consuming it is miles away from what we should be doing. So I think that we shouldn't rely 100% on nuclear, but I don't think we should rule it out either. But as long as we're getting away from coal and oil and fracking, that kind of thing, then we're moving in the right direction. So I'm just looking at his document now to try and answer your question.
No, it's okay. That's fine.
About nuclear. So yeah, it talks here about socialising our energy supply. Yeah, so basically he's saying, hang on 1 second, I really should. He's got so many policies, you see, it's hard to keep up with them all. Yeah, okay. Trying to see it. Okay. So he wouldn't, from what I can see here, he wouldn't build any new nuclear power stations, but he wouldn't get rid of the ones that we already have.
Yeah, you see, I think he's splitting the difference there to kind of keep his Green voters on side. Wouldn't you agree?
I don't know.
if we're honest.
No, I genuinely 100%. I'm not lying now. I don't know if he's doing that because he's trying to win over Green voters and keep them happy, or if he genuinely doesn't like nuclear. I think he keeps mentioning the cleanup costs and getting rid of waste, so there might be he might be related to that. I don't know, but at least looking at his green policy here, there's proper in-depth mention of not only the way that we produce energy, but the way that we the way it's used and the way that the companies basically almost take the piss a bit with the expectation of the government often to subsidise or at least greatly help with cleanup costs, which obviously, if you believe in a completely free market, isn't something that they should have to do.
Sorry, were you asking me that?
No, just a general point.
Oh right, yeah. Well, yeah, I agree. They should clean up. Don't get me wrong. I was just gonna kind of add, because we seem to be talking about utilities now. So, I mean, the 1970s was probably the high point of kind of state, nationalised in kind of public services in the UK. I mean, and utilities. I mean, would you say that public utilities in the 70s could broadly be defined as kind of a socialist model? In the broadest sense possible.
Probably more statist, really.
Well, state socialism.
If you want to call it that, yeah, definitely not socialism in the actual kind of proper, term. But yeah,
Because it was pretty crap, wasn't it?
he was, but he's not. He's not calling for 100% state ownership of energy. He's calling for what Germany's doing more, where you have a lot more people producing energy and owning it cooperatively, and
But
a
I
lot more.
feel, do you not feel? Sorry, Robbie, go on, mate.
No, honestly, you go on.
I was just going to say that. Do you not feel that he hasn't explicitly said, the kind of models of the 70s were really rubbish, in the sense that, someone like Blair would have said, the 70s was rubbish. I mean, to use one example in the utility sphere, I remember reading that up until the mid 70s, less than half of British households had a landline telephone, and you had to wait months to get one installed. And this is when you had a free market US, where nearly 99% of homes had a telephone.
Yeah.
So clearly our model was failing there. And I don't think Corbyn's necessarily said, look, the kind of socialism we had in the 70s, it was rubbish, it didn't work, and we needed to change it.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, I don't. I think one thing you don't want to do when you're talking about this is because I think just because of his age and because some things he says are word, I don't think he's as stuck in the past as people necessarily think he is. Yeah. So I mean, I would definitely agree that things in the 70s were not. You don't want to be looking at going towards that era again. I don't think things in the 80s were that great. No decades have been perfect, has it? Really, there's been.
I agree.
But I know what you're saying.
But then again, no other decade had Britain going to the IMF, and the 70s did.
Say that again, sorry.
No other decade had Britain going to the IMF because we were in such economic straits, whereas the 70s did.
Yeah, but
so we were sort of the Greek, kind of in a Greek position there, which so it really didn't work, did it?
No, it did. Things weren't going well at that time, but it's one of those interesting things. This is why I get so frustrated with what Thatcher did in the 80s. Is things were going badly in the 70s, and then they went for a kind of the complete opposite almost, and that, in my opinion, isn't working either. And we seem to be. I don't know really. I think we're sort of trying to. We've still got a long way to go until we find a kind of way of doing things that seems to last longer.
Do you think Thatcher mainly went utterly the other way, or do you think she kind of ameliorated the kind of more negative aspects of the 70s? Because I mean, can you say she went fully the other way when there was still an NHS, there was still education, there was still welfare? I mean, at much higher levels than there is now.
I think she went as far the other way at that time as was possible.
We didn't not have a safety net in the 80s, did we?
No, but I mean, you obviously can only change so much in a period of time without people literally going, that's too much, Thatcher was, I don't agree with Thatcher on anything, but she was a very clever politician.
She was actually one of the first international leaders to raise the issue of climate change at the UN.
Okay, that's not necessarily the other way.
So I think you may agree with her there.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, in terms of I'm sure if I looked enough into it, I could agree with almost any human being in the world about That's something. I just think I'm talking about her way of solving problems as it created others. I think that she's permanently changed the politics of our country. And probably
isn't that what you want to do from your position? Now, I'm not saying she's right, but I mean, Attlee fundamentally changed the politics of our country.
I'm not saying that she
isn't that the aim?
Yeah, of course it is, and everybody gets into politics wants the country or the society to be in the kind of direction they want it to be, but obviously it's a direction that I don't support.
No, that's fair enough, and I'm not saying I support her either. I just I certainly don't. Robbie, can I use this time to show you a graph, if that's okay?
Graph away.
Well, firstly, just to kind of get stuck on definitions again. I mean, Jeremy does define himself. I mean, it seems obvious to say this after all the things in news, but Jeremy does define himself as a socialist, doesn't he?
Oh God, yeah.
So, would you say that he intrinsically believes that capitalism fails to provide for a fairer world?
In
the broadest sense of that, I'm assuming if he's a socialist, he believes that capitalism, as a route, cannot provide for a fair world.
Oh God, that's a good.
I mean, I know that's loaded, but I mean,
no, it's loaded. Yeah.
Why don't you answer that yourself? I mean, do you think capitalism can provide for a fair world?
How do you define fair world? first of all.
Well, do you think it can, say, improve living conditions and lift people out of poverty?
I think capitalism has definitely improved. I think it's a system that's worked for a certain amount of time, but we're coming to a kind of period of time now where, especially in terms of resources and that and those kind of things, and in the environment, I think that definitely capitalism probably can't. Hasn't got a long-term future if we want to carry on going basically properly. Do I think it can provide for a fair world? Probably not, considering just because I think the problem with capitalism is I think inequality is kind of a almost unavoidable aspect of it.
Okay.
I think it's almost impossible without a lot of policies that aren't really capitalist. So trying to regulate the markets a lot of welfare, that kind of thing.
That's a good starting point, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of get your position from that. So, I mean, this is a graph. Can you see this graph I'm sharing now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, it's the world income distribution. So I saw this a few months ago, and I thought this was quite interesting because if people look to the income per world citizen on the bottom, which obviously goes up, I mean, it's sort of clear that even though we've got a lot more people in the world, income is more fairly distributed. And this is in a...
I'm just analysing it.
No, it's fine. I'll let you analyse.
Yeah, no, it's because a lot of these things. This is the problem with any graph. I mean, I've used graphs back before where they sort of claim to say something and you look into it and it's sort of being manipulated to appear a certain way.
That's a good point.
Okay. So 1820 a world in poverty. I mean, just so you know, I don't deny that the world has got better under capitalism. No, I wouldn't.
No, I don't think you do. I don't think you do.
Yeah. It's obviously has got many advantages, but I think that you wouldn't want to keep capitalism forever. That's probably a better way of putting it. Mainly because of the fact that of population. Because obviously capitalism is a growth-based system based on production and selling of goods, that kind of thing. And I don't think it's sustainable enough for long term. We're using up every year that we're using up the amount of resources the planet has earlier on in that year. And that's something that I don't think, those kind of problems are something capitalism, I don't feel in its current form, unless you can change it somehow, can address.
I guess what I meant by this is when you listen to a lot of left-wing criticism, and not just Corbyn, but kind of the broader, I don't know, let's define it as the moderate / too hard left. There's a really overused word, neoliberalism, and they kind of everyone's super critical of capitalism. But if you take the broad span of this graph, if this is true, and I grant you that people can skew figures, and I'm always skeptical, then the world in its broadest sense has become more equal and become more richer due to the free market. And what we can say is, I mean, we've added another kind of 15, 20 years onto human lifespans, at least in the developed world, and we've lifted so many more people out of poverty in the developing world. So do you not think when people make criticisms of capitalism, they should almost be saying it's actually done a bloody lot of good as well?
Probably, yeah. This is the problem with any political position. I've definitely been guilty of this before. Is people can get emotional or maybe a bit biased and end up presenting a position they maybe don't necessarily believe, or being a bit unfair on something that they're criticising and forgetting there isn't such thing. I mean, I'm not going to pretend there isn't any such thing as a perfect way of doing things. If any system we're going to come up with will have some sort of downside to it, that's just how things will be. I think for a long time, I think that this is you can't design a perfect system. I don't think it exists.
No, I agree. I agree with you there. Do you by the way want to go on, because we talked about utilities a lot? I mean, do you want to?
No, this is okay. I mean, the inequality thing's interesting because I mean, obviously, I think you have to send me the graph after because it's quite hard to really.
Yeah, not a problem.
Oh dear, what's the computer doing?
Does this segue nicely into Corbyn's economic policies for you?
Yeah, just another thing I was going to say is, I mean, another obviously use that to say that people have more money and that, but obviously, as we know, for example, in the last 10 years, the rich 100 richest people in the UK doubled their wealth, and then we obviously know about the issues that we face since. So that's why I think these things aren't as simple as a set of information on one graph. And
I agree with you, that's true, but I think there's a big difference between, so kind of like the 0.2, 0.5 at the top, they've got obscenely wealthy in comparison to everyone else, but the other kind of high earners that we're talking about, your 100Ks and above, the gap between them and the other low earners it's possibly distorted by the real outliers at the top, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. I think that when the likes of people in my position, like Corbyn, that talk about inequality and wealth, that they are really talking about the really, I'm on about the millionaire, billionaires, not the kind of people that are getting 100 or 200k a year kind of thing, because I don't think that's.
Yeah, I don't have it to hand, but I believe I think it's the Gini coefficient that they use to define inequality, and I think if you take the Gini coefficient at face value, over the past 5 years, we have become a more equal society. Now, I don't know why that is, but I'm just saying that that's another kind of thing to bear in mind, perhaps.
I'll ask you, before we move on that, just out of interest, like, so what you asked me about my views on capitalism. What are your views on capitalism?
That's a good point. I think it's like a dog. to use an example, I do in the sense that if you have a dog which is untrained, it's crap. I mean, it's gonna go everywhere, bark at everything, do everything. But if you have a dog which is trained and on a lead, it can work very well for you. And I think capitalism, when it works well, is like a sheepdog that's highly trained. It's productive and it actually adds value. So I certainly believe in the idea of free markets, and I believe that free markets stimulate wealth, and that people, by acting selfishly in a free market, that kind of Adam Smith sense, can provide virtue for society. So I think Adam Smith speaks about, the baker bakes the bread from a selfish standpoint, but there is an overall virtue for society because society gets bread as well. So I think in a very broad brush sense, capitalism is a good thing. But I do believe, like you say, that kind of inequalities or structural inequalities will come about, and it's the role of the state to kind of provide a safety net to help people within that.
Do you think that capitalism has a long-term future in like society or the world?
Yeah, because I think it's inherent to human nature. So my basic thing where I think the left wing and the right wing get it wrong is I think the left wing people basically completely dismiss the idea that people are to a degree selfish and individuals, and I think the right completely dismisses, not entirely because the right's quite focused on tradition and community, but I think the right completely dismisses the notion that people do work together and cooperate. So I think humans will always act as humans are. I think there'll be these very contradictory creatures which are one part social and one part selfish, and I think we're always gonna, on a median, work out with economic and political systems which kind of show both those sides to human nature.
Yeah, I can kind of get behind that. I do think there isn't enough consideration of human nature when people do come with a policy or an idea, but they don't take into account how people work enough at times. So I probably would agree with that. Yeah, no position in politics is perfect.
Absolutely.
I don't pretend for a second that mine is. I definitely think that mine, for left-wing politics, especially the world that I would want to see to work, it would involve how to say this? You'd have to try and build up a lot, really promote the kind of positive aspects, you want to call it, of human nature, and do your best to reduce the negative ones. But obviously, that is really, really hard. So, yeah, I think that left-wing politics can work, and obviously has done. But it certainly is. I don't deny for a second that a lot of people in the world, including myself, are very selfish. It is a part of being human being, I think.
Yeah, I mean we're a big mess of emotions, really, aren't we? So, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing. But so, what else do you want to say about Corbyn's policies? I mean, shoot, give me what you think's good about it, because I want to hear from your side.
Well, obviously, I think that some of the stuff that I like about Corbyn isn't necessarily related even to his policies, and I know it might kind of sound weird, but it's to do with stuff to do with the. I think that for a long time, I don't know if you agree with this, but maybe the past 30 years, sort of say Thatcher onwards, the political ideas that have been put forward, been discussed, the way the media treated certain ideas, and so on, it's all been very limited. So you've only been.
Sorry, Robbie, just park that one there, because this is a really good idea. So you've mentioned the media there, and I know when we were talking about this, you wanted to discuss the media. So before we go on to Corbyn, do you want to just nail what you think about the media? Because I know you have quite strong views about this, don't you?
To put it very briefly, I think that if we viewed our media from the future or read about it in a book, we'd think, oh, that's just so. Look at all that propaganda and look how hateful the media is, and look what they're obviously trying to get people to think a certain way. I think we don't realise. I think we almost don't want to believe we're being fooled. A lot of people don't like to think they're being fooled, or to think that the media influences how they think. and it does it to everybody, including myself. And I basically think that the media has got, obviously you have the Murdoch owning the Sun and Sky News and that kind of thing. You've got the Barclay brothers owning the Telegraph. You've got Richard Desmond owning the Express, and you've got Rothermere owning the Daily Mail, and they're all obviously very wealthy individuals. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think that they all promote a very similar, how to say this, very similar viewpoint or stance of the world. And you can see that. I mean, even people that, whether or not you agree with Jeremy Corbyn, you can't deny for a second that he's had a lot more media focus in a negative way than the other three candidates probably combined. It's very interesting when you put forward certain points of view, the way the media almost sort of enclose on you. And I don't think that they're very good for. I think they hold us back. They don't let people. Not every idea that Corbyn's come up with or I will come up with or anybody in the left will come up with is good. But unfortunately, the media almost tries to shut it down straight away. And I think that we suffer for it. I think that we suffer for that.
No, I think that's an interesting summing up. I mean, I just to give my own view on this, I certainly think we've got. I would agree with you that a lot of media, be it mainly tabloids and so forth, is somewhat centre right in the UK. I mean, would you not say that? I mean, I know you've got hesitations about the Guardian, and I certainly feel it's become a bit of a rubbish newspaper of late. I think they thought barbecues were racist or something recently, which kind of is part of the kind of slippery slope of the Guardian. But I mean, do you not think there's a fair amount of commentators in the newspaper that are providing a kind of a Corbyn perspective? I mean there are voices in the broadsheets if you so choose, and I think there are a few in the Independent as well which are saying Corbyn's okay. So it's not all doom and gloom, is it? Although I do take your point.
But you wouldn't be able to get away with everybody having to go at somebody. It's more just the. I mean, the Guardian. I used to like it as a newspaper, and I think that when it does investigative journalism, it's best. But it's basically a faux progressive paper. So when it's comfortable, it's happy to put forward ideas that are a bit out there and to promote things that is posted. I've learned about loads of interesting things.
Comments is free is definitely not faux progressive, though, is it? Comment is free is pretty full on progressive, don't you think?
Yeah, it can be, but I mean, I think that as soon as somebody comes along that actually has a chance of influencing things or probably changing things, then the Guardian seems to almost retreat into a sort of, they went for the Lib Dems, didn't they, in 2010, and they went, vote for Labour in 2015. I think that it's a paper that pretends to be progressive until it actually matters. And if you look at who owns the Guardian, the fact it hasn't paid tax in years.
But you can't. When you use the word progressive, there, are you not basically co-opting it to your viewpoint? Because you can define yourself as progressive and be a Lib Dem, or you can define yourself as progressive and support Yvette Cooper.
True. Maybe progressive is the wrong word. Let's just say outside of the current norm. That's probably a better way of putting it.
No, I think that's somewhat correct. I mean, what I was going to say is, do you think that if if you compare, when the kind of hard left and militant and so forth were quite popular in the early 80s. Now, do you think you now as activists have it better or worse than they did 30 years ago?
God, I don't know. I wasn't around in the 80s. That's a really good question. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea.
Because I would say you've got it better. I mean, if you look at something like Twitter, for example, I mean, I'm not saying, I'm definitely not saying that Twitter and blogs and all this kind of rabble kind of influences elections. I mean, if it did, Ed Miliband, if Twitter decided elections, Ed Miliband would be PM and Natalie Bennett would be in his cabinet, wouldn't it? That's a good example. I mean, on Twitter, you are an outlier if you have a centre right view, aren't you?
But that's I think probably there is probably a bit of a, but I think part of the reason for that I've noticed that is because as you said, a lot of the media is centre right, and there's so much kind of public airing of centre right views that things like Twitter is the only real chance that people with maybe more left wing views have got to properly air their views. So that's maybe why you get a lot more of the of people that think like that, because as you said, that doesn't represent the actual population, so we know that it isn't that. And I think part of it is down to the fact that Twitter and Facebook and blogs and things like that, it's the only chance that people with left-wing views get to promote their site, their point of view. I mean, if you look at The Guardian, for example, of all their writers and what they've had to say about Corbyn, only Jeremy Corbyn and George Monbiot have actually said, yeah, he's great, we support him. The vast majority don't, and as you know, the Guardian said we nominate Yvette Cooper.
Well, you've got that. What is it? That Seamus Milne or whatever. I can't even say his name correctly. He's quite out there, isn't he? I mean, I'm assuming he backs Corbyn, doesn't he?
I don't know, actually. I don't really. It's quite funny when I read Guardian articles. I just tend to read them. I don't look that much into who's writing them. For some reason.
Do you go under the comments? I mean, the comments on them. I mean, especially they're like inverse Daily Mail comments. I mean,
they can sometimes be.
They're just as hateful about people who don't support Corbyn.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't 100%. Having read some Daily Mail comments, I would say the Daily Mail is probably the worst of any paper. That includes
I don't know. People call Tories like proper scum and everything. Like,
I'm not saying the Guardian's great, but in the Daily Mail, I've heard people say that upvote Nazi quotes and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely. I don't think I'm not saying it's a race to the bottom. That some Guardian commenters should probably. Think about how they speak about people and that. I don't like the Tory scum thing. I think it's something I've fallen for when I was younger, and it's something I don't want to do now.
But do you think? I mean, it's interesting you mention that, because would you say, broadly speaking, if that kind of rhetoric has been used by the Corbyn camp far more than the other camps?
Do I think it has been?
Yeah. So his supporters on Twitter. I mean, a straw poll of his supporters on Twitter. They're kind of more likely, on average, to use words like Tory scum than, say, Yvette Cooper supporters, would you say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting, really. Again, I think that again sort of comes down to. I'm not excusing it, because I would say Corbyn supporters have not led by the example of Corbyn, and that's probably not. He's been remarkably restrained, and I think they should have followed his lead. But I think again, it comes down to that when you have a certain point of view, and everywhere you're reading, people saying things about. You need to get a heart transplant and that kind of stuff. You're making you feel like you shouldn't think what you think, all over the place. It's that kind of built-up frustration. It's that built-up. I'm not excusing it, by the way. It's not okay. But I think that's partly not. It's not down to. I don't think Corbyn supporters are magically worse or better people than any other support of any other candidate. I think it's because the other candidates get more public support, and then you kind of get a building of frustration, and then that's taken out via Twitter.
Do you think there's a difference between saying someone's an idiot and saying someone should leave a party? Do you not think there's quite a distinction between saying you're that fundamentally different to me that you shouldn't be in this party, or saying I think you're wrong and you're a bit of an idiot?
Yeah, but I mean, I definitely don't think being a Corbyn supporter, I can speak from experience. There's plenty of supporters for the candidates that are happy to lay into you as a person, so it's not limited. I've been told I'm an entryist. I've been told. That I'm naive, that I'm going to destroy the Labour Party, that Corbyn's a terrorist sympathiser, so that means I am, that I'm anti-Semitic, and all sorts of horrible things. So, and that's one of the nastiest things I do not like. This anti-Semitic thing. I'm sure you'd agree with it. I think the elections got far too nasty, and I think a lot of it is to do with the way that the people like Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, that have been related to the party have spoken.
Well, I mean, the anti-Semitic thing's quite interesting, because that's something I maybe perhaps wanted to cover later. But I think you're right to bring that up. And I mean, I won't go on too much right now, but I mean, I would say if on average, I certainly don't think Jeremy Corbyn's an anti-Semite, and I think that's a bit unfair. Well, it's very unfair to say that, but I would say that on average, Jeremy Corbyn is known to have publicly associated with anti-Semite to a far higher frequency than the other three candidates. I mean, would you find that fair to acknowledge?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm very aware.
I know you're not Robbie. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. No, I'm very aware of who he's. I think what it comes down to is a sort of a fundamental misunderstanding, or not even a. I think it's a misrepresentation of why he did it. If I thought. For a second, I'm sure and I know you already said that you don't think he is, but I think a lot of the supporters thought for a second that he was meeting those people because he agreed with them in any way, or to give them some sort of to try and support their cause or anything like that. We wouldn't be touching him, I would not be supporting him for a second. I think that part of the problem with all this discussion around Corbyn and who he's aligning himself with is, and Corbyn's campaign in general, is that he's been forced to defend himself far too much. In my opinion, compared to the other candidates, and that it's partly his own fault because he's chosen not to attack the other candidates. He's having to justify what he's doing all the time, and you've not really had to hear the
Do you think that? Do you think that's perhaps because, rightly or wrongly, he has shared platforms with, I'm going to say, quote unquote, nutters, far more than the other candidates have. I mean, you just can't go into Liz Kendall's background and find her hanging out with people who say they have no issue with British soldiers dying.
Well, no, but I mean, again, it's sort of that's deciding who's a nutter. You know what I mean? I think that if you look at his history, and the things that he's campaigned for in his life, so he's campaigned for peace in Ireland, he campaigned against apartheid, he campaigned for gay rights in the early 80s.
On that issue of an extremist, though, Robbie,
So yeah, so I can see why people would be worried on a sort of a if you don't know much about it and you read about it, you might go, oh my gosh, that is just terrible. How could he deal with those people? But I think we've obviously tried the more military, not speak to them, try and fight them, that kind of approach. You want to call it a more
who we talk, what conflicts are we speaking about here?
Everyone you can think of. So the way that the UK and the US have funded Israel for a long time, and not really taken them up on what they've done in Gaza last year. That's an example how we dealt with the Iraq situation, what we did in Libya, what's going on in Syria right now as another military. Obviously, that way of dealing with things isn't working.
Although, Robbie, just to interject, I mean, without spiraling into kind of all sorts of foreign policy, because we're getting very broad there, to bring it back to that quote I was speaking about then, the guy who he shared a platform with said, every dead American, British and Dutch soldier is a victory. Now, I mean, I use the word nutter. I mean, you would say that is the quote of a nutter, wouldn't you?
Of course, yeah.
So that's what I mean, basically. I mean, people who have those views. I'm not saying he endorses those views. I'm saying he has hung around with a lot more nutters than the other candidates have.
Of course, yeah, but I think you need to look in. I think it's more about why has he done it than who. We can if we carry on forever, if anybody tries to do any kind of discussion with people that you don't agree with, as he's made very clear, if you just say don't do that, that's bad, then these problems are going to carry on happening. You know that if the military intervention kind of method, if you want to call it, had worked really well, I would be a lot more sympathetic to the attacks on him, but it obviously hasn't worked. And I think that the people I think Yvette Cooper and Annie Burnham, for example, need to justify why they voted for the Iraq War a lot more than he does for just having a discussion with people that are obviously, as you say, nutters. Because the result of what Yvette Cooper and Annie Burnham did is hundreds of times worse than the result of anything Corbyn's done. And this is what I mean about him having to be on the defensive all the time. And I think probably quite unfairly.
No, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I don't know. We've come on to the issue of extremists. Shall we have a look at the extremist issue now, if you want, because it's sort of come up organically?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really think there's much sort of. I'm not sure what we can add to it because I obviously where you think that you shouldn't have shared a platform with them. I can certainly sympathise with that view. Because obviously it's the worry.
Well, I've got a few kind of. I've tried to talk from my own kind of personal viewpoint and perhaps different things.
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm interested in what you think. So, I mean, I'm looking at an article now which is talking about the IRA, and I'll just try and share it now. If
I mean on the thing.
Yeah, 1 second, bud. Can you see this? There's a lovely picture of Jeremy Corbyn surrounded by two terrorists there having a cup of tea, which is somewhat nice.
Aren't they members of Parliament?
Yeah, but I mean, Martin McGuinness, admitted he was an IRA commander. I mean, the pragmatic conclusion of the troubles aside, if I said to you, Martin McGuinness is a scumbag, you go, well, he's a scumbag, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course I would. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is,
I think the problem is again is people are choosing very selectively who is allowed to be a terrorist or a scumbag or whatever you want to mean.
Well, I think Martin McGuinness is more than allowed to be defined as a scumbag.
I'm not denying that for a second. What I mean is, I think a lot of people would see Liz Kendall and Burnham or Yvette Cooper or whoever sat next to Tony Blair and say that's a guy that has murdered thousands.
So you would draw a moral equivalence between Martin McGuinness and Tony Blair?
No, I would actually. I know you're not going to agree with me on this, but I would say based
See,
purely on death.
just to be clear, I don't understand how is the comparison to Liz Kendall next to Tony Blair relevant then if you're not going to, if you're not saying they're the same, because they're not, are they?
Well, no, but what I'm saying, well, again, well, I know you're going to disagree, but I think Tony Blair's worse personally. Not because I think that he's.
You think Tony Blair's worse than Martin McGuinness?
In terms of actual damages caused to the world, then that's not deniable, is it really?
But I mean, Tony Blair hasn't endorsed putting bombs in pubs in mainland England and blowing up innocent civilians.
No, but he's actively, done it. Like basically took it through Parliament and then it happened. So I think that
But he's not. But he's not. But sorry, just to be clear, I mean, Tony Blair hasn't, you know, supported a terrorist organisation acting internally within the UK.
Well, no, but again, that's very. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I don't like Martin McGuinness. I don't
No,
like.
I know. But I think that's.
I just think my main point is that we get a bit too selective over who's a bad person, and who isn't, and who you're allowed to be next to and who isn't. I think that I think that it's a. I don't know how to say this really. It shouldn't be. I don't really know. I don't really know. I think it's also a bit of a. He sat next to him for coffee. Okay, what does that mean then? Does that mean that we don't trust him at all? That we don't like him?
But why would you have a brew with somebody who's killed your fellow citizens?
I think it's the.
I mean, why does he? I mean, right now. So this is the 21st of July, 2015. So we can't even use that he's creating a narrative argument during the Troubles. I mean, if you know the history of Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, I mean, they should be pariahs in that context. Why would you want to go near them now? If you don't have to, in terms of working installments, unless you have a reason to be with them, why would you want to associate yourself with that person? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, part of the problem is we don't know. I have no idea why he's there with them. You don't know. You don't know what.
There's got to be a bloody good reason to be with them, hasn't there?
I guess so. I don't know. I genuinely have no. I would not pretend to know for a second. But why you sat with them. But my overall point is with this whole discussion is that I think far too much pressure is put on Corbyn to explain what he's done, whereas it's obvious with his past history, voting history, that kind of thing, that he pretty clearly is against any kind of war, is against any kind of hatred and that kind of thing. And I think you need to be. I think the other candidates need to justify a lot more. I mean, Liz Kendall, for example, said we shouldn't have voted to recognise Palestine, and I find that a pretty extreme view. But nobody's really, and this is what I mean about the media. Nobody really is very. And also,
is that as extreme a view?
No, I'm not
saying than supporting Gerry Adams.
No, of course not. But it's the again, it's because you put so much focus on one candidate, people kind of switch off.
But is the focus on him? I mean, the focus in one sense is because he's come from the back, and it's an interesting narrative story that this person from nowhere has come to basically, have it wrapped up as a win. But do you also not think that the reason there's a focus on one candidate is because these sorts of stories just aren't as frequent for the other candidates?
I think you could say that. I mean, it's pretty. I think the focus is on him is because he's obviously doing quite popular, and he's the only one saying ideas that are actually quite a bit different, and it's
But in terms of the extremist stories where people say, oh, they're digging up new things, I mean, you don't get people going, oh, Liz Kendall hung out with somebody who thinks killing Jews is mint. I mean, those stories just aren't there, are they?
Well, we don't know because they haven't had nobody really. I mean, when does Andy Burnham, Yvette Cooper, or Kendall really get grilled about anything? I mean, you could easily grill Yvette Cooper about the fact that she flipped her houses in the Jane Spencer scandal and claimed loads and loads of money fraudulently, pretty much. And
okay.
I'm not saying that that's the same thing at all. But what I mean is that I don't think it's just that. I don't think that the people are giving these kind of things like this much kind of focus because they're genuinely concerned about it. Let's put it that way.
Just on this as well, though, Robbie. When there's a quote here where Corbyn's asked to condemn the IRA's actions, and he says, I condemn all bombing. It's not a good idea. It is terrible what happened. Now, I think if you asked a lot of fair-minded people about the Troubles, they'd say, well, yeah, the British Army did have its moments where it acted in the wrong manner. However, the IRA are absolute scumbags. And I don't understand why Corbyn always gives these answers that are like a bit wishy-washy in the middle. Like, I would have expected him in that context to go, there's real issues with some of the instances of the British Army acting, but, the IRA, what dickheads. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I kind of don't think it's in his. To be honest, I don't think it's in his nature to speak like that.
Well, not, obviously not use the same wording as I just used, but
even in the whole, I think that I just don't think it's in his nature to go down that path. And I do think if you say I condemn all bombing, that does probably cover the IRA. If he said,
but why not just say yeah, the IRA were horrible?
Well, I don't know, but again, I think it's too much focus on you got asked a couple of questions and then we're talking about that.
But he has been asked. This is after he has been asked to clarify things, and he hasn't just said, they were terrible. I mean, and it's interesting that you do get other people on the left. Like, I think there was something that Guido Fawkes dug up about Owen Jones basically going away to kind of Sinn Féin summer camps, and it just all looks a bit weird, doesn't it?
I didn't even know about that, actually.
Yeah, I'll try and find your link. I mean,
I genuinely didn't know about that. I mean, you could. I'm sure this is the thing.
Or he was speaking. He wasn't. I'm not saying he was a member of Sinn Féin. I think he was speaking to a group that were there talking.
I mean, with the whole Corbyn and the and like people like Martin McGuinness and that. I mean, I think part of it is probably literally just that about keeping a good relationship with people like that. I mean, it's not in anybody's interest for the members of Sinn Féin and that to have a really bad relationship with people in Westminster that obviously hasn't worked out well in the past. So I don't think that, let's put it a different way, I don't think him sitting next to people like Martin McGuinness is him being like, yeah, the great guys. I don't think that's how he works. I certainly don't think it chimes with his his views and his history of campaigning and voting anyway.
I've got another one here which I think is somewhat interesting. Can you see what I'm sharing now from the Yorkshire Post?
Yeah, you do know that I'm not like a Corbyn official spokesperson.
No, I know, mate. No, I know. I just think these are interesting issues, and I just want your perspective. I'm not saying you speak on behalf of him at all.
Yeah, okay, yeah, go on. What's this? I'm not actually being people.
This was a protest. You know when Nick Griffin went on Question Time?
Yes.
So it's
I remember.
Yeah, the good old days. So here we go. So the protests, organised by Unite Against Fascism, continue throughout the filming of the show, and Jeremy Corbyn addresses the crowd. And he told them, no one should be sharing a platform with an avowed racist and an avowed fascist. Now, bearing in mind his views there on Nick Griffin, do you legitimately feel Corbyn has stuck to that in other interactions he's had with people?
No.
At least you're honest.
No. I mean, I don't think anybody's. I think it's probably been a bit inconsistent there, hasn't he? He might have got. I'm not even going to try and explain it.
But this is the sort of thing. I mean, I don't think the other candidates have made blunders like this.
I would prefer it if he had shared a platform with Nick Griffin personally. I think I actually think this is part of why I like his attitude towards people like Martin McGuinness. As I do think you almost disempower people like that.
So why is he for platform sharing when it's essentially someone with brown skin? But if it's on the far right, it's verboten. It's really bad.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It could just be an inconsistency there where he feels like people like that. I don't know. I'd love to ask him if I got the chance, but I genuinely.
No, that's a fair point. I mean, I'm not saying again you're a spokesman or anything, but I think
it's a good question.
I mean, it's something I came across last week, and that hasn't been in the news too much, and I thought it's at least an interesting point to draw out.
And if this is you don't need to play this one if it's the thing about where he says friends for Hamas.
Yeah, well, he does. He says, I'm inviting my friends for Hamas and Hezbollah. And, now, I mean, going back to that Nick Griffin quote, I mean, Hezbollah are extremists, aren't they?
Well, yeah, obviously, as are Hamas.
So why does he want to share a platform with, terrorists?
Because of the people dying thing. To put it bluntly.
But people can't. But people can't talk to Nick Griffin, but he can talk to Hamas and Hezbollah.
Again, I think he's been inconsistent there. I'd agree with you. I would like him to have said, I don't agree with Nick Griffin or whatever. But I think it's important that we figure out what's causing him to believe these kind of things or whatever. So yeah, I'd agree with you that he's been inconsistent there.
But aren't Hezbollah the type of organisation you'd run 1,000 miles from?
I would. He's a brave man.
Well, no, I don't mean in terms of fear. I mean in terms of repulsion.
Let's put it a different way. I think that even you, I know that you don't like what he's doing here, but we can both pretty much establish very comfortably that him talking to them does not chime with his views. I think what he basically is.
Why are they friends who he's honoured to kind of host?
If you I'm guessing you've heard Corbyn's response to that point, so I'm not sure I'd add anything unique there. But basically, because you don't invite people, it's just basic diplomatic talk. It's not. I don't think he's saying my friends that I love and let's go for a drink after. It's just the way you speak.
I mean, come on though, Robbie. He's not in an ambassadorial position. I mean, I understand the realpolitik of kind of being an ambassador and having to kind of speak with people you don't like and be polite and go for all the dignitary matters. But he's inviting them to it. He's not speaking to them face to face. He's just saying, my honoured friends, and I just think that's a bit of a weird way of putting it. He could have just said, I am inviting Hamas and Hezbollah.
Yeah, well, again, it's the. I think it's probably a big example of focusing a bit too much on semantics. Again, if I thought he actually thought highly of them, I wouldn't be. I wouldn't have voted for him in the leadership election. I think it's this focus on things like a term of phrase or word that is detrimental. I think that it's obvious. Nobody else has made the effort to have any talks with them, and as we know, last year in Gaza. There was a conflict and 1,500 Palestinians died, and I think about 10 Israelis died. Every one of those lives is important, and the US, the UK government don't seem to have any interest.
But Hezbollah don't think those lives are important because I mean they position themselves and their civilians.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't mean again, I don't know how. Obviously, I would agree with you a lot more if the military approach has worked, but it hasn't. And again, we're selling weapons.
But then again, there's sort of not to get too into the Israeli-Palestinian kind of debate because that is a rabbit hole, let's say. But there is this kind of assumption, I think, in certain quarters of the left that Israel has been somewhat indiscriminate. And I mean, I would not say that Israel is being indiscriminate.
Oh no, I'm sure that they're taking some steps, or have taken some steps to minimise civilian casualties, but they have got Iron Dome and have got incredible wealth and resources, and I reject the idea that attack was measured and necessary in Gaza. I don't think anybody would go, yeah, that was a fair response. They have, and again, it's taken away, the whole Palestinian conflict takes away the historical context of it. A group like Hamas doesn't come from nowhere, doesn't get support from nowhere. Certain conditions lead to that, and I'm not saying that makes Hamas okay, and I agree with them, just to be clear, but I think you have to look at these issues are complex, and I certainly think that what we're doing now isn't working, and that Corbyn's approach is the only one that could work.
Would we speak about groups on the far right in the same context? Would we? I mean, do you think the left would be as quick to analyse kind of a far right movement and say, well, the issues that arise are somewhat complex, and we need to kind of analyse this? I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, if you had 2 terrorist attacks in the UK, and one of them was committed by a young Muslim man who was obviously motivated by, let's say, an anti-Western grievance, and then you had a terrorist attack by kind of a member of the far right, I would say that a lot of left-wing people would wash their hands of the far right person and just be like, oh well, what a scumbag, what a racist. But with the Islamist, they would be much less reticent to wash their hands of him and call him a scumbag. The narrative would straight away be, well, it's because of X and it's because of Y, and we've got to understand it. There seems to be on certain areas of the left a kind of phenomena where we're far quicker to start getting into the context of why someone does something if they're kind of an Islamic persuasion. But if it's anything else like the far right, or even people who aren't far right, like say right-wing parties like UKIP, will write people off, will dismiss them. Do you see what I mean by that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the dismissal of UKIP especially was has been a bit unfair and ridiculous. And I think that I was guilty of it before. I'd probably agree with that. I can imagine that situation that the left or whoever, but people in general, I don't think just left, would be a lot more maybe understanding or attempt to understand why the Muslim did it compared to the far right person.
Because this potentially, I'll tell you what this potential links into. This potential links into immigration now to kind of ancient minorities, and I think that's an area where I would say, despite saying Corbyn represents working class people, I don't think he necessarily represents working class communities across the UK. Because, I mean, take for example, Yvette Cooper's constituency of Castleford. I mean,
Cass. Sorry, go on.
good old Cass, I know, Las Vegas. I mean, when I was a teenager, I worked a Saturday job on a market stall in Cass for like 5 or 6 years, and I have to say, one of the things, kind of 4 or 5 years before UKIP became prominence, that people consistently moaned about was immigration.
Yeah.
Now, I think the problem with the Corbyn / left approach is a lot of people try and say, oh, well, we've got to explain to people that, or they ever say people are either hoodwinked by the media, or we've got to explain to people that the pressure on public services costs not of government investment in X, Y, and Z. But there doesn't seem to be an acknowledgement that a certain section of working class people just feel immigration's too high right now. And instead of trying to represent that to some point, there's kind of a dismissal of the belief, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I would probably agree with that as well. Yeah, I do think that I think that part of the problem again is because the immigration debate. This is where an extreme, almost like an extreme or biased presentation of something causes the same on the other side. Where I think the immigration debate's been very nasty for a long time, and some of the words used to describe the migrant crisis at the moment and that have been nothing short of astounding, and things that you think shouldn't really be happening nowadays. But then I think that people then to try and counteract that. This isn't an excuse, by the way. This is more like me to attempt to explain it.
Yeah.
To counteract that, people then go too far the other way to try and sort of go, oh, it's not. Don't be silly. It's sort of the extreme kind of presentation of how bad immigration is in the way it's talked about. Almost promotes people on the other side to do a equally biased in a different kind of way presentation to kind of counteract that, so you don't really get a real discussion about it, if you get me. That's like the UKIP where they obviously tried to frame a lot of problems around in the country, around the UK, and around immigration in the EU. Sorry, and they seem to be suggesting to a lot of people that was the main cause of all the issues. So then people that didn't think that was true would go too far the other way and say the EU is great and the immigration's not a problem. And then the truth is probably a mixture of both. I mean, I think that my personal view on the immigration thing is that it's a bit of definitely used as a bit of a tactic to distract, and it does, and it's a very common thing throughout history for people to take a distake or to blame people that have come from elsewhere, to blame those problems on them. But that doesn't mean that I don't understand why somebody would feel that their culture was being infringed on.
Do you not think, though, that it's fair to say that migration levels since kind of Labour came to power in '97 are far higher than historically Britain's been used to, and that if you've grown up in quite a settled community and perhaps have, kind of mildly social conservative / centrist views, you may feel somewhat alarmed if people come into that community and radically change the nature of it?
Yeah, I think you would do. I think it's a human thing as well to not like change. People don't like change, especially when it's kind of forced on you. But I think that I don't think there's much, to be honest with you, because of the fact that Britain's been a part of the EU for a long time, and even if we leave, it's not going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the number.
I think immigrations are going to be a hard thing to tackle, and I think that it would be much better to look at the kind of what causes people to immigrate, or emigrate, if you want to call it, so much, as opposed to being like, we need to control our borders more. Because I think that also promotes a bad attitude. I don't think it's fair. Well, even if people from Castleford don't like their lives being, their communities being changed or whatever, which sometimes I can certainly sympathise with, it doesn't mean that then that I think that the way that they kind of frame that as the biggest issue in their lives, I don't necessarily have to agree with that at all.
I mean, I agree with you there. I'm just kind of using that as more of an extremist point, and I do think people can be over the top. I mean, I guess what I'd say is I certainly think the UK could kind of provide a home for a lot more refugees and asylum seekers and so forth than we are right now. But at the same time, I mean, the UK is a state like any other state, and it's ultimately going to pursue its self-interest. And whilst it will want economic migrants in terms of the benefit they give to our GDP, there does come a point where, because of the UK's kind of self-interest, it isn't necessarily going to accept everyone, is it? It's not going to have open borders.
No. I mean, I certainly would like a world one day where we didn't really have that, where because countries are doing so well that people don't tend to emigrate or immigrate places. But that's obviously
But that's probably not going to happen, is it?
a long way away. Yeah, God no, not in our lifetime. But yeah, I think the immigration thing it's become such a toxic thing that you can't have an actual proper discussion about anymore. That's the problem. You can't.
Sorry, just to move the conversation on. Do you know what I think it is? I think it's more about integration.
Yeah,
so I feel that.
I think it's a mixture of integration and then certain problems in society, and then people see a lot more people from a different country and then equate the issues with that. I'm not saying that's all what it is, but I'd say it's probably more to do with those two things, definitely.
But I do feel that the left has been far too reticent to kind of criticise kind of new immigrant communities into the UK who hold socially conservative views. I mean, to me personally, it doesn't matter what colour you are or what religion you have. If you don't think women are equal, if you don't think gays are equal, you're an absolute idiot and you need criticised in the fullest way possible. And I think some people almost give certain communities, and I'm speaking the broad about communities, but they give them a free pass in a way, and they don't acknowledge that there's minorities within those minorities. And if you're, say, a young gay Muslim or a young woman Muslim, and you constantly see your community represented by some elderly bloke who's randomly the community leader, I mean, how is that representative? I think everyone's an individual first, and we just need to stop seeing people as communities.
Yeah, potentially. It's just a difficult one, isn't it? The whole immigration thing. It's a difficult one. I think it's a almost an impossible subject to broach because. But in terms of the reticence to criticise, again, I think that comes down to the one-sided presentation of an issue that then results in a equally one-sided, in a different way response. And I think that again comes back to what we talked about before, where I think that the media is far too narrow and almost echo. You talk about echo chambers. The media is a bit of an echo chamber. And when you read and hear a lot of stories in papers about how an immigrant comes in and gets a really great house and you don't, and all these stories about.
Oh, that's ridiculous! Yeah.
Yeah. I think that then it provokes a reaction of people that think that is not a balanced view. So then they go equally the other way, and then it's try and balance it out, and it goes too far. And you don't get the actual truth, which is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yep, no, I agree.